Well, welcome to the first in the series of Sustainable Stories. Today we have Bruce Hall on the interview. Bruce was a very well loved and popular panelist and presenter on our recent COVID-19 webinar series for the solar energy storage and clean tech industry. A lot of feedback from attendees said they would love to hear more from Bruce. So I've invited Bruce onto Sustainable Stories. I am your host, Russell French. I am the founder of Energetic Consulting, Solar Social, and co-founder of Sunfluence. And we specialize in marketing, sales, and business management, support services, and agency work. Bruce, I've known for, gosh, it must be well over 10 years now, possibly 12 years. Bruce has been a senior finance professional for, gosh, probably about 40 or 50 years now, 38 years as a senior banker with the National Australia Bank, has gone on to work with wealth companies, wealth creation companies and financial services companies. And one of the main reasons I've got Bruce on the call today on the interview is basically because he's worked with over 1,200 businesses over the space of several years later in his career, supporting them so they can grow and scale their businesses, but also developing strategies for them to maintain resilience, to get through challenging times. Worked with many businesses through the bushfires that Australia experienced, over several years, and hired by state governments to do that support work. And Bruce runs workshops on all kinds of subjects and has been a real inspiration in my own personal journey. So Bruce, really great to have you on board the Sustainable Stories, the first kickoff in the series.
Thanks, Russ. Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's really good to have you. Bruce, I've worked with you for over 10 years supporting the businesses that I've run, and you've been a crucial part of that. I've seen many highs and lows in my career, and you've been there as a rock in the background, giving advice and giving guidance when I've needed it most. Today we're going to turn the tables on you because the focus is normally on me. So
well, that's going to be a bit scary for you.
I think it's a little bit easier for me today. I'm not in the spotlight, but I'm interested in where you're at professionally right now in your career and a little bit of the backstory about where you've come from. Perhaps you could just share with us what you're up to at the moment and what you've been doing previously.
Yeah, look, Russ, at the moment I'm heavily involved with a finance group, a group of mortgage brokers. I do their marketing, web stuff, a lot of work around improving systems, processes, that sort of thing, which is, it's a young team, really good, and I've enjoyed that. It sort of came about, I was providing basic consulting services, and then over time I just got more and more involved, started coaching some of their people in the early days, and just gradually got more involved through that. Prior to that, I was involved in, obviously, my own business in the marketing space. Also, as you mentioned, did a lot of work in the 2009 bushfires for 3.5, 4 years, which was really hard, but really enjoyable. It really was. And it was very challenging work, but got to learn. I think I learned more about business in those 4 years than I learned anywhere in the rest of my life, purely because of the circumstances the people were facing and the need. They didn't have the money to pay people to do stuff, so I had to learn how to do it for them. So the learnings out of that were just amazing. But and then prior to that, I had 38 years with the NAB, in all sorts of roles. So I was probably much luckier in my time compared to the young people today, in that in those days I worked in all sorts of areas. If you they thought you might be going somewhere. They threw you into all sorts of different roles, and I was lucky enough to work in HR, investment services, marketing a couple of times, credit, and other areas, and then it finished up leading teams in the corporate and business banking sectors. So yeah, very diversified, which was good for me, because if I don't get variety, I get bored really quickly. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly been a meandering path in some senses with your career. I mean, obviously there was a solid focus in the banking sector and other sort of financial sectors, but I'm really keen in what brought you to mentoring, coaching, supporting businesses. You know, the 1,200 businesses. What got you to that point of wanting to give back in that way?
Yeah, look, probably I was actually didn't start banking because I liked finance. I started my career as a 15-year-old because I wanted to get out of school. I had no idea what finance was about. And I was probably the NAB's worst employee they ever had for about 4 years. I was actually demoted, I think, 3 times and threatened with a sack a couple of times. So it was, I was from far the best employee of the bank had. And I really, as I went through, I didn't enjoy analysing numbers at all. But what I really loved was meeting business owners and understanding how they made money, you know, how they ran their business, and seeing the differences between a good business and a bad business. And it became apparent to me as I sort of got more exposed to businesses that there were certain factors that seemed to be apparent in good businesses versus bad. Mm. And I got into the mentoring just by chance. My former boss, Mike, he left 4 years before me, and he got involved with the mentoring service, and he just said to me one day, we're having coffee, I think this is something you might enjoy. And I got involved in it and loved it from day one. I just found it, again, for that reason, sort of working with the business owners and just seeing, you know, what they did, how they did it, what they did well, you know, things that maybe could be improved. But it was just something I found that I love learning for a start, and that was a big part of it. Just that exposure of, you know, being with people, working with people. Mm.
And would you say, I mean, you found your life's calling or your purpose or your mission when you came to that work?
Oh no, it was probably before that, Russ. It was actually before that. It was when I was with the NAB, and I'd had at this stage a career basically for 20 odd years working in the central business district in Perth and in Melbourne, pinstripe suits and all this sort of stuff, and thought in part that I enjoyed it. And some of the roles I did enjoy, some I disliked immensely. But I was given a role in 1998. I was given a role out in the suburbs, and I didn't like it at all. You know, I saw myself as a city banker, and this wasn't good enough for me, and I was going to resign, and I was going to do all sorts of things. And then the place I was appointed to had been really successful. It was a top performing business centre in the state the year before, and had some really good people, very young team. But I saw, after I'd been there a while, short time, that while they'd been successful, you know, I had these young managers in tears in my office. They were burnt out, and support staff were miserable. And it wasn't all of them, but, you know, enough of a percentage to be concerned about it. And I sort of had a look at it and thought, you know, this is interesting. And I was at that point of, should I resign, or should I stay with it? And in fact, I think I'd said to my wife I'd been given a poison chalice and I was going to go back to Perth. And Carol said to me, well, that's great. I'd love to go back. But if you go back with the attitude you've got, nothing will change.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, stupid woman doesn't understand. And then thought there might have been a grain of truth in it.
And there usually is.
Yeah. And when I did the seminar, I put up, and I didn't actually talk it through when I did the webinar with you, I put up a little graphic that I picked up in many, many years ago about when you're faced with a challenge, you ask yourself the question, is it a lack of skills or is it a lack of resources? Is it a lack of skills? If it's a lack of skills, what are they? How do I get them? Is it a lack of resources? Again, same question, if it is, what are the resources? How do I get them? Or is it my mindset? And I thought, well, I could do the job in my sleep, so I had the skills. I had all the resources in the world, so that didn't matter. It might have been a grain of truth that it might have been my mindset.
Yeah.
So I reflected on that a few days, and I ended up making a list of all the positives and negatives of the job. And I sort of realised that, look, up until that point, I guess my focus work-wise had been do a job for a couple of years, get promoted, go and do something else. And I thought, that's not going to work here. And I thought, well, my purpose changed. And I decided that the purpose of the job then was to help this young team see value in what they were doing and find enjoyment in it, to love coming to work.
And how did you do that? Like, let's break down some of the tactics that you use, because when you've got underperformers, I mean, that's a really difficult situation to be in. They don't want to be there, they're moaning and groaning about, turning up to work, hard to get out of the bed, that kind of attitude.
Oh, this mob were performing. They were all performing. They're doing well, but they were doing it in a way that wasn't sustainable.
Yeah.
They were working insane hours. They were putting mountains of pressure on themselves, and you'd praise them and they'd say, oh, I'm just doing my job. And, it was really, quite, it was a funny situation where you had a really high-performing team, but miserable doing it, basically.
Yeah.
And so what I did, I thought, well, okay, the first thing I did, I picked the top 10 things that was great about working on at that setup. I put it in a frame and put it on my desk. And the staff would walk in and they looked at it and they thought, what, the old bloke's losing it. This place is a bit strange. And I had an interview area where we used to interview clients, so I started putting it there. But to change myself, what I did, it didn't happen like, and that's the thing with change, I didn't see a flash of light and it changes. It was over a period of months. I'd drive into the car park in the morning and I'd sit in the car and think, righto, Bruce, you're on Broadway. And then I'd walk in and try and lift the team.
Yeah.
And looked for ways to find fun in what they were doing, making sure they started to see the value in what they were doing, because they were doing some fantastic stuff. And over a period of months, the tone of the place started to change.
Did you have to get rid of underperformers on the team?
No, there was no, there wasn't. In fact, what I found was, when I got there, everyone wanted to leave. So everyone, because they were burnt out. They were just looking to get out, and so we had to sort of change the way we operated, and that was, we had Monday and Friday sales meetings. And that was really just around in those meetings, just focusing on the positive, building on the positive. In business, it's when things don't work, or we often praise people about this and then say, "Oh, you could do that better," and all I remember is that you could do that better.
Yeah.
Instead of talking about successes, how did those successes come about?
We have a negative bias that is predetermined or predispositioned in ourselves, and we typically go towards the negative.
Oh, we do.
Ourselves.
that's all we remember.
Yeah.
And look, it was interesting. After probably 12 months, we became a centre of where people wanted to come to rather than leave. And one guy in particular, who's in this finance group I work with, Greg was one of the people who wanted to leave. And I actually tried to get him a job, in a sort of a support area, but I couldn't. And basically worked with him, and he was a very inward focusing guy, very quiet, did a great job with his clients, but the stress on him was enormous. He went from that to being the greatest innovator you've ever seen. And he won the Banker of the Year 12 months later or 18 months later. And he resigned from the NAB after I left and went to Westpac and won Banker of the Year there.
Wow.
And just by seeing his job differently, looking at his job and approaching his job differently, he went from this inward-looking person to an amazing innovator, just always coming up and saying, "Oh, I think we could try this. Can't we try this? Can we do this? Can we do that?"
Is there a sense of fake it till you make it, do you think? Because, when you're not in that zone,
big time with me, because I was in a very negative frame of mind.
Yep.
And sure, I did shift myself. I did shift myself by sort of looking and saying, well, these are the positives. But I still had to remind myself, listen, Bruce, if it's going to change, it's got to start with you.
Yeah.
And that's the thing I think about leadership. Leadership, starts at the top. People will model the behaviour of the leader. And
well, on that point, Bruce, I'm interested to delve into that a little bit deeper, because I've known you for this period of time, and you always have a sunny disposition. You're always pretty much on your A game. It feels like, from the receiving end, and you come with a great attitude. You're prepared. You've done the work beforehand, and then you do the work after any meetings that we may have. So what are your own routines and habits and rituals that you implement to get yourself into that space in the morning?
Oh, it's probably, I think one of the things, Russ, is it's just learned over time.
Yeah.
It's learned over time. A few things which I found really powerful, again in this period, the same period. One of the things I found really powerful was working on your business rather than in your business. And again, that came from a client. We had a client who had bought a big manufacturing operation, and there was, I can't remember, I think there was something wrong with the due diligence. Long story short, not long after he bought this business, it was in real trouble, big time. And it looked like, he was going to lose absolutely everything. And we were meeting regularly with him and nothing was working. And then it looked like, pretty serious. And then all of a sudden, and I mean all of a sudden, things turned around. And I said to the manager, listen, I want to go out, I want to see what's happening out there, and walked in. And as soon as you walked in, you had a sense that this place was different. Staff were different. Everyone was up. It was just working well. It wasn't forced. It was a natural thing. It really, and we did the tour, and the business owner was explaining to me how they changed everything. And at the end of a long process, I actually said to him, well, what the hell do you do? Because it seemed everyone else is doing that. And he said to me, he said, Bruce, I think. And I said, what are you talking about? And he told the story that he got home late one night, 10, 11 o'clock at night. He'd gone to bed. He woke up about 4 o'clock in the morning, think he's having a heart attack, rushed off to the hospital. It was an acute stress attack. I think he had only one day off, and he went in anyway. He went in on the Friday, and he walked in and he said to the staff, I don't care if this place burns down. I am not to be interrupted. And he said he locked himself away in the office, And what he did in those days, really before we had the laptops and all this sort of thing, he had a big work pad, and he sat there trying to think his way out of the problem. And he said to me, I sat there for about an hour and nothing happened. Then I started to think about my business through the customer's eyes, and all these ideas started to come out. And he said, now what I do every Friday morning is lock my door for 2 hours. And
have a creative session.
Have a creative session.
And I think so many business owners don't do that because they're working in the business. They're either taking the phone calls, organizing the meeting, wearing the different hats of the entrepreneur, the business manager, or the technology person, but they don't just step out of the office and grab a coffee and do that thinking time.
And actually allocating specific time for turning off everything. And just focusing on it. The power of that, I found, I went back to the office and I started to say, I'm doing an eddy. And I would close my door on the Friday morning and sit there and just brainstorm. And I had, in those days, a big lever arch folder full of ideas, more than I could implement in my lifetime. But what it did for me was it gave me so much energy, because, I just had all these ideas about how to improve what I was doing. And then some of the teams started to do that as well. And of course, they were coming up with ideas. So it's, so that was one thing that I learned. And it is, as I got into the mentoring, I saw successful businesses do work on their business.
So and to get yourself, I mean, that's one way that you get yourself into that space of being positive and focused. What about, it's 6 a.m., whatever time it is, when you get up, you put the slippers on, you're grabbing the first coffee. What are your first things that you do in the day to get yourself ready for the day ahead?
Certainly, probably my routine. The first thing I'll do normally is get up and I'll probably meditate for 20 minutes. I learned the old transcendental meditation back in the 70s, in the flower power days. And so I don't do it every morning. I'm not really strict about it. But I would say most mornings, I would do that. And I do find that just centers me, relaxes me. And I think it's really powerful, particularly if you live a busy life. Sometimes at night, if I've had a busy day, I'll just sit down and clear my head as well. I just find it really helpful. So that's in the routine. Coffee is a very important part of my routine. I need a coffee to get going in the morning. But when I start my day, before I start, I do plan what I'm going to do for the day. I'll sit down and say, okay, have a look at my calendar, always look at my calendar in month view. And I have all my tasks and everything in the calendar. And so that I can see what I've got on, when something's due, all that sort of thing. And then really bring it down and say, well, okay, what are the most important things I need to get done today? I don't over-plan my day, because I find that is just pointless, because things change. But I try to focus on what are some key things I need to do today.
Are you using a digital platform for that, or is it a paper organisation planner?
No. Look, I really use my calendar as my organisational planner, Russ. I've tried all sorts of things. Look, I use a lot of software, as you know. I'm a real fan of Evernote. I've got thousands and thousands of notes in Evernote, and the maximum number of notebooks you can have. I think it's a wonderful tool, Evernote. So I do use that as an organisational tool for myself. But it's really just always looking, forward and saying, well, okay, what are the things I've got coming up? What are the most important things? Then saying, well, okay, now what am I going to do today? What am I going to work on? How am I going to spend my time? At the end of the day, I do like to sit back and review what I've done as well. So I'll sit back 5 minutes, and that's more for just ticking off and say, well, I got that done. Or maybe I've got to tweak something.
Well, as long as I've known you, you've been very organised, and also the one thing I really admire about you is that you've got your finger on the pulse with technology. And often,
Yep.
I feel, more so than myself. I mean, you do have, no offense, Bruce, you do have a few years on me, and yet, so much more, I feel.
Yeah, and
than I
look,
do.
that's probably one thing I'd say to business owners. When I worked for the NAB, I was pretty average with my technology use. Look, I could use a computer very basically. I could use PowerPoint terribly, Excel very basically.
Yep.
And to the point when my son was, a teenager, I'd ask him to show me something and he'd go crook at me, I've shown you that 3 or 4 times already, Dad, So it was like that. And it was really not until I got out into my own business and then I realised that I had to learn this stuff myself.
Yeah.
I had to learn it. And particularly when I was doing the bushfire work, I just had to learn it to survive. Like I was working insane hours. And what I found was with videos on YouTube and podcasts in particular, I could learn enormous amount easily, and
what about, so one thing I've often struggled with myself, Bruce, is
yeah.
retaining that information or absorbing, vast quantities of information and actually doing something with, because I think it's often a lot of us listen to podcasts and we get inspired, but we don't actually take that and put it into action. So how do you, how do you do that?
How I do it, I'll generally know when I've come across something that hang on, I need to learn this.
Yeah.
That's where Evernote particularly comes into play. I use Evernote. Anything I want to remember, retain, use goes into Evernote. In the last 12 months, for example, because of the needs in the finance group, I had to learn Excel at a pretty advanced level, and I've got a folder full of Excel formulas. How to do this, how to do this, how to do this. I don't try and retain it in my head because I just can't. So but if I know it's in that bucket somewhere, I need to find out about this. It's in that bucket. I can go to that bucket, pull it out very quickly and have a look at it.
Yep.
With all the web stuff I do, that's how I sort of remember that. I'll have a look at a video, I'll copy the link, put it in there, make some notes. Then when that issue arises, I know where to go very quickly to do a refresher and find it.
Because I think, in our days, we have a lot of wasted time. We can be learning when we're, driving to the office or wherever it may be. Or these days, not going to the office, maybe just the supermarket, but we have these pockets and windows of time to learn. Would you, when you've been in the car, I know you do a lot of driving, typically running workshops. Would you then, when you get to the other end, stop, take your notes down? So
sure. Well, sometimes I'll pull over. Sometimes I get so excited by what I'm listening to and I'll pull over and make a note, It really, podcasts, I really don't listen to radio. I just listen to podcasts and just the range of sort of podcasts you can listen to, anything you're interested in. But a lot of those, you'll get an idea and think, whoa, wow, that's fantastic. And before I go into the workshop, maybe make a few notes. I'll often, when I go to a workshop, I'll start talking about what I heard on the podcast, but sometimes you really get a good piece of gold, and I'll pull over somewhere and just write it down straight away. But we're in information overload, and I do think if you don't have somewhere that you can put information that you need, that you can quickly just get to it, then that's an issue. The other thing I found, which I use productivity-wise, and it helps me in this context, is when I worked with you introduced me to a thing called Jing, J-I-N-G, which you use to create a installation manual, I remember, and an operations manual or something for your business. And then Jing moved to Snagit. Now, I would use Snagit every single day. There is not a day I don't use Snagit. And the way I'll use Snagit will be to a lot I use it for a lot of web stuff, creating graphics and those sort of things. But for productivity or reminders, I'll take screenshots and put annotations to remind myself, this is how you do this, this is how you do that.
Yep.
And so, again, I don't have to reinvent the wheel. I can very quickly find the information that I need.
So you mentioned before that overwhelm. I mean, yes, we're in the information age and a lot of us experience overwhelm, especially at the moment. We're in COVID-19.
Yep.
We have information coming at us left, right and center right now.
Yep.
Not only news about what's happening, but a lot of people have really switched on to the online world to provide their services that way.
Yep.
So there's information overload, but there's also a sense of overload of stress and anxiety and fear.
Yeah.
People are losing their jobs. People are being impacted health-wise, and the future is uncertain. Have you got any particular advice to business owners or staff management, how to confront those challenges and deal with overwhelm?
Yeah, probably just a couple of points. Number one, is you start with yourself. If you don't care for yourself, and what I see with business owners, and I saw in the bushfires, people pushing themselves to the point of collapse, trying to get things done and all this sort of stuff. And then that negatively impacted their relationships with their family, with their friends, with clients and all that sort of stuff. So the starting point is to look after yourself. The second point, which is something, again, that I learned over the years, was we create our own experience of the world. It doesn't happen from out there. Something happens out there, we create our experience of that through our thinking.
Yep.
Always, 100%, always guaranteed, and so it's our experience that we create. The event is the event. The event happens. It's how we think about the event that causes the issues.
Yep.
And that doesn't mean you use delusional positive thinking, but it's just a recognition that, listen, I'm feeling uptight because I'm thinking uptight, and just pausing for a few minutes, just pausing, slowing down, just not meditating or anything like that, but just pausing and recognizing, hang on, it's not coming from out there, it's coming from between my ears.
Yep.
And just that simple recognition is really, really powerful. It really is.
I certainly know you've given me plenty of advice over the years about, different businesses that I've either started or been involved with. And personally, I've had, highs and lows in my career. What about yourself? What are some of the deep lows that you've gone through? Do you feel, that impacted you, but also helped shape you in your career? And maybe how did you overcome some of those perceived failures to learn and grow?
Well, probably the good example was the one that going to the suburban centre, because that was probably as low as I got, and didn't want to be there, and then sort of turning that around. Just trying to think outside of that. As a very young guy, probably, it's probably a reasonable example. As a very young guy, I, apart from being the worst employee, once I started to sort myself out, I started to do reasonably okay, but other people saw in me what I didn't see myself.
Yeah.
To the point where I didn't want to be promoted, and I would get my performance appraisal and tone it down so that I didn't get promoted as quickly. And I didn't see that, and that probably, I got a series of very rapid promotions, put a lot of pressure on myself, because I came through the year, or because of my age, there was no such thing as psychology when I went to school. There was nothing like that at all. And I can remember it was a particularly stressful period. I was a very young manager, and my biggest client was a guy who was a property developer. I would have been lucky to be, I might have been 30. He would have been probably mid-60s, something like that. Big, bombastic guy. We disliked each other from the first minute we met and couldn't stand each other. And it looked like I was going to lose him as a client, and I couldn't have cared less. But at the time, I was, this is before there was any real training. I was going to night school for, there was a selling course at night school. And that was the other fear I had. I didn't like selling. And so I was doing this thing at night school, this course. And the guy teaching it sold white goods in like a Harvey Norman, something like that. And he was talking a little bit about psychology, and I'm sitting there thinking, oh, what's this all about? So at the end of the course, I went up to him and I said, look, I've got this problem with my major client. And he explained to me, and he said, okay, what sort of guy is he? And I said, oh, he's a big, bombastic property developer type. And he said, and I said, and what sort of questions are you asking him? Usual banker type questions. And he said, well, no wonder you're having problems with him, Bruce. And he explained to me, he used a matrix that they had when they'd sell to people, and 4 basic personality types. And I can remember this guy, John, was a driver. Yeah. And I was talking to him like an analytical. And he said, virtual opposite. He said, Bruce, you've got to, if you want to be successful in sales and people relationships, you've got to think that people are different to you. And this was like a light coming on for me. I thought, what do you mean? Everyone's the same. And he said, if he talks a certain way, you talk a certain way. If he uses extravagant, then you do it. Anyway, I thought, oh, well, okay, this will be okay. And
which is like mirroring and matching or reporting.
The concept of people being different, like psychologically, I just didn't. Anyway, John was that was Wednesday, Friday. He was coming in for our usual fight. And he walked in and started on his usual way. So I started mirroring. He was swearing, I was swearing, he's waving his arms, I'm waving my arms. And then after about 5 or 6 minutes, we both stopped, looked at each other and burst out laughing. And we ended up with a really good relationship. And that was the point probably in my life where I started to think, hang on, there's a bit in this psychology stuff. There's a bit in this people are different, that people think differently, all this sort of stuff.
Well, and certainly from a salesman's point of view, or marketing, or, it's all psychology based. It's emotional, connecting or relating. And people don't realize this, that, they just think you can go in with a bright personality and speak fast and, deliver the features and benefits, but it's so much more subtle than that.
Oh, much more subtle. And really, that's where it all falls apart, is if you're just doing that. Because I knew all the techniques in the world, but it's that interpersonal thing. You've got to build a rapport with the person. You've got to understand the person. You've got to understand your customer, all those sort of things.
Yeah.
So that was a turning point with John, that just understanding that people are different. And
did you have any growing up? Did you have any particular role models that you looked up to, and certainly, and then maybe someone from the past and someone now that is a role model in your life?
Yeah, look, probably I just thought about that. And again, I grew up in a different time. I sort of grew up in a Kalgoorlie in Western Australia, and didn't really even think about role models. I had in the street I lived in, I had my grandparents and 2 uncles in the same street and cousins. So you had this big extended family, and it was just how things were at the time. The idea of sort of role models really in those days, for me anyway, I cannot think of anyone that I thought was a role model. There were people I liked and people I thought were successful, but no one that I thought, oh, I want to be like that. But probably a person who had a really big impact on me in terms of people management was Nobby Clark. I was lucky enough sort of a little bit later in my career to be selected as, not long after he took over, I was his secretary, and which meant I sat outside Nobby's office and I could hear a lot of the conversations that...
Was Nobby a senior leader at NAB?
He ran the NAB.
Yeah.
He ran the NAB as the managing director.
Yeah.
And this chap was the best people manager I have ever seen, ever. He had a mind like a steel trap. He could switch one of the most intelligent people I've ever met also. He could switch from economics to technology, he could pick up the phone and take an unbriefed call from AM or PM on the radio. He'd do a TV interview, drop of a hat, didn't think about it, no preparation, brilliant individual, but the best people manager I have ever met. He would come out, just as an example, and he'd ask you something. He'd say, "Oh, could you help an old fella out with this or that?" You know, and this is the guy who ran the whole organisation.
Yeah.
I saw him once. There was a chap. He told this person not to do something, and the chap did it, and it had a couple of ramifications. And so he tore his head off him. Yeah, gave him a lecture. The next day he came out and he said, "I'm just going down to see this chap. I just got to put my arms around him and let him know I still love him." You know, he was a brilliant leader, absolutely brilliant.
And tell me about that. I mean, there's often common characteristics in leadership. I mean, you've spoken with so many leaders over the years, and dealing with different businesses. Do you see some of those common characteristics in those senior leaders?
Oh, they are. I can tell you, good people who are truly successful and enjoy long-term success are good with people.
Yeah.
People who treat their people badly, don't enjoy long-term success. Or they end up totally miserable and crook themselves.
Yeah.
Good. Out of all the good leaders I've seen, they've been people who are good at leading people, because that's what leadership is. You lead. You don't dictate, you lead.
Is it a skill that you're born with, or can you learn it?
Oh, no, you can learn it. I learned leadership, and I learned leadership and learned a lot of leadership from people who I saw who were good leaders, and I would just try and model their behaviour a little bit. But certainly Nobby, I just couldn't believe how humble the guy was, and how much of a good leader he was. And one thing that Nobby did too, which too many leaders don't do, he would occasionally just go out into the field unannounced. And this is in the day before phones and visual identification, all that. He'd walk into a branch and he'd just ask them, "Oh, how are things going?" And they wouldn't know him from a bar of soap.
Yeah.
And they'd say, "Oh, our computers are down a bit." And "Oh, are they?" Then he'd come back and say, "Now, listen, I want you to make a few phone calls." But he would get out and talk to people on the shop floor.
Yeah.
He was very conscious that when you're in a corporate structure, people just give you the good news, and so he would talk to people at any level to find out what was really going on.
And that sense of humility and leaving the ego at the front door, for some of us, it can take our whole career to learn that. And it needn't be that way. I mean, typically when we're young, we're full of bravado, whether you're men or women, and you just want to kind of take on the world. And you learn, well, some of us at least learn by hitting the head up against the brick wall. But certainly with that sense of coupling failure with going through those lessons, and it often brings you to that sense of humility and dropping the ego.
Oh, it does.
And it seems to be crucial, if you can let go of the ego and come at it from a humble point of view. I mean, I always remember that you would tell me never to be the smartest, you don't need to be the smartest guy in the room or the smartest woman in the room. You can come in and let those intelligent people around you, as a good manager, you pull them together and then nurture them to share their intelligence and to lift them up. But to be more humble. And you used to say to me, I'm just a humble banker. Break it down to me in layman's terms.
Yeah, and look, it's one of the things you learn over time. Again, in business, I was never afraid to say, when I was out with, a manager seeing a client, and they'd be talking, often people talking jargon, trying to impress you, and I'd just say, look, I'm just a humble boy from Kalgoorlie. Can you put that in words of one syllable for me?
Yeah.
And the tone of the meeting would change. They'd all of a sudden go, oh, well, what I mean is this, and just being yourself. If I didn't do that. Look, it took me a long time to learn to do that, but I found it really powerful.
Yeah.
If you just say, you admit you don't know, you don't have to be the smartest person in the room. And you just say, look, I don't know. I don't know what you're talking Martian to me. I don't know what you're talking about. Can you explain it to me? And people go, oh, yeah, okay.
Which again comes back to that sense of rapport building and not talking to it from your point of view, because we're all different. I mean, some people are auditory, some are visual, some are kinesthetic. Yeah, and just I think we do get to a place where we understand ourselves more, so therefore we understand others.
You do.
Level.
Yeah, you do.
What about developing that sort of grit and resilience in your personality and in your career? I mean, what can you share on that front? Because I mean, you've shared some different examples of challenging times and also inspirational leadership. How have you developed your grit and resilience?
I think a lot of it, as you just said, Russ, comes through experience. Where you realise that you make a mistake and the world doesn't fall apart. It doesn't matter how bad it seems. The world doesn't fall apart. The sun still comes up in the morning. And if that happens, it's a bonus. So it's just, we all make mistakes. I still make mountains of mistakes, but it's just recognising, the world is not going to fall apart because of those mistakes, and just saying, well, okay, I'm made of blue. What can I learn from it?
Absolutely.
It's as simple as that. It's not, you don't have to overanalyze it. It's just there.
And then, I mean, it's much more difficult at the start of your career.
Oh yeah.
When we're trying to prove ourselves and you don't have that level of experience.
Right.
I mean, some people pick it up through sporting arenas or other, could be debating, it could be anything that you bring that discipline and that resilience,
Well, like Russ, you talked about, probably a good example for me. One thing I hated doing was public speaking.
Yeah.
I did everything in my means to avoid doing it. Now I do it and I love it.
Yeah.
And that just came through learning a skill, and that's probably one of the things I guess you learn as you go along, is that often things that people belt themselves up about, it's not because they are, not smart enough. It's just because they haven't learned the skill yet.
Do you believe in the 10,000 hour rule to learn a skill, or is that,
Yeah, I think that's rubbish. I do believe, though, you have to practice a skill. Yeah, there's no doubt. No, you don't suddenly become good at something by doing no practice. You've got to practice a skill. And I guess I became good at public speaking by practicing public speaking.
Repetition. Rinse, repeat.
Yeah, like in my early days, if I had a presentation to do, I'd rehearse it and rehearse it and rehearse it and rehearse it until I was comfortable with it, And now, even today, even though I know how to run workshops, if I get a new workshop to do, I will do a run through of that workshop beforehand to get the timing, to get the pace, to get everything right. I won't just jump in and wing it,
What's the old saying, Bruce, that luck is where preparation meets opportunity?
It is.
Yeah.
Very
what
much.
About, these businesses? I mean, it doesn't just have to be business owners. It can be, management, or even just, a junior person within a business. How can they find peace right now in these really troubling times? Because a lot of businesses are failing, or they're running out of cash, or they're hitting the wall. And this level of high uncertainty is really overwhelming.
It is.
I mean, how can, employees and business owners find some peace right now?
Okay. Yeah. Recognize, first of all, that, okay, that is reality. That is reality. Your experience of it, you are creating yourself. You might become unemployed. That's true, and I could be unemployed. That could be true. But how I experience that unemployment, I create myself.
Yeah.
So that is a fundamental thing to remember. But as I said in the webinar, the other thing is, the starting point is, don't focus on what's wrong. Start to build on what's true and positive. So you look at yourself or you look at your business. What is true and positive about myself? What skills do I actually have? What's true? What's true about my business and positive about it? What's true and positive about my customers? It is so powerful. There's a really good book written about 5 or 6 years ago called The Happiness Advantage by a fellow, Sean Aker.
Sean Aker.
Yeah. And he's on YouTube. Really good book. And what I like about that book, Sean Aker was a Harvard lecturer, but the book is based on really good research. And he researched a lot of businesses through the global financial crisis, and the ones that came through it were the ones that really sort of said, well, okay, it's a disaster out there, but let's look at ourselves and our business. Start with what's true and positive.
Yeah.
And like, if you're having a bad day, just sit down and say, okay, what's true and positive that happened today? You'll find something. Stick with it till you find something.
Well, because a lot of us have a tendency to catastrophize.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, I've woken up that countless times at 3 a.m. Concerned about some business deal that's going down and it's starting to go pear-shaped. And so, when that's happening, when the house is burning, everything's crumbling around us, and it's 3 a.m. and we're awake yet again thinking about work. Do you think that's the right approach, to come back to that simplistic approach of what's working?
Oh, it is. But the first approach, Russ, there's no point in, while you're going, oh, it's all terrible, it's all awful, trying to do that. The first approach is to pause and settle.
Yeah.
Just settle for a couple of minutes. Don't try and force yourself into writing what's true and positive. You've got to just settle. Just settle and let the sort of, it's a bit like, if you put sand in a bottle with water, you shake it up. That's what your mind is like when it's really busy.
Yeah.
If you stop shaking it, it just settles down. And, and when it settles down, you get a little bit of clarity, and you might start to think, well, if it goes pear-shaped, it's not so good, but I suppose this could also happen, or this could happen, or, once you let that mind settle a bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the great innovators in the world, that's basically what they did. Einstein, Einstein would work out the problem. He'd try and understand the problem he's trying to solve, and he'd write everything he knew about the problem down. Then he'd go and paint, or he'd play the piano, or he would just sit there and daydream. He didn't work it out.
You've got a great technique that I just thought of that came to me, that often when you have a problem at hand, exactly to that point, you don't try and go too deep. Sometimes you look at the problem, what's the answer? Let it sit, go away, go for a walk. It could be an hour, or it could be a week.
Well, the thing is, answers don't come through your analytical thinking. Never. You think you've had a problem. Anyone has a problem that you can't solve. The answer happens when you're in the shower, when you're not thinking about it. It happens when you're walking in the bush, you're not thinking about it. That's how the mind works. Once your conscious thinking gets out of the way, it gives a chance for these little ideas to pop up in your head.
Yep.
For some people, it's listening to music. that does it. Just enjoying the music. Oh, hang on, there's the answer. Could be playing music. Oh, yeah, that's an idea.
Yeah.
And it happens once you recognise how that works. It happens more and more often. If you realise, if I can get out of the way of my thinking and just, I know what the problem is, forget about it. The answer will come to you.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. But Bruce, it's been absolutely wonderful chatting. I mean, you've got a wealth of experience and a lifetime of knowledge to share, and 1 hour together certainly isn't enough. I'd like to ask you one last question here. Let's pretend you actually once shared an exercise with me, which was the eulogy exercise.
Yes.
Writing as if you'd already passed and someone else was reading your eulogy.
Yeah.
I'd like to sort of put that back in your direction now and say, it's the last of your days. You're at the very end, and you've got some grandchildren, and you want to pass on some wisdom to them. We're not going to go all the way to the eulogy, but we're close. And what would be 3 pearls of wisdom that you would share with the grandkids or your children? It could be one word, or it could be a sentence.
Yeah, probably just enjoy life. Yeah, just see what happens. Just see what happens. Always keep learning. Always keep learning. And probably for me, you never retire. Never retire. I see too many people, really good, smart people, who just retire and give up. But probably, look, it's not something I've given a lot of thought to be honest.
Yeah.
But it's, maybe that's something I need to think about. But so maybe you, through this thing, you've given me something to work on. But,
well, that'll be a first. Normally, I've got plenty to work on in the other directions. So, look, Bruce, it's been fantastic, and thanks for your time. Very generous of you, and I know you've got a very busy schedule. So we'll wind it up there, and
No, Russ. No, it's been my pleasure, and good luck with this little project. I think just sharing ideas from all sorts of business people at the moment, probably in the next 6-12 months are going to be pretty challenging for businesses. And if business owners can pick up one idea here, another idea there, just might be just something that they can build upon. But
sometimes all you need is one gold nugget.
You do. You just need one little bit of inspiration. You think, hang on, that might work for me. And away you go.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we've delivered a few nuggets of inspiration today. And Bruce, thank you for your time. And I'm sure it won't be the last time we'll be doing one of these interviews in the coming years.
All the best.
Thanks, Bruce.